My name's Graham Smith. I'm the creative technologist at Shelton Fleming. I'll start off by addressing what the hell does a creative technologist actually do? It's one of those new titles that you only really find in London. I don't think I'm going to win any prizes in this room, hopefully, for saying that I think event technology is going to be a huge part of events, just ever increasing as we carry on. And so there's a lot of event tech out there, and my job fundamentally is to go out, understand it, interrogate people, ask the really awkward questions at exhibitions, and figure out what a single piece of technology does really well, what it was made to do, what it could do at a push, and what it's just really not mature or ready for yet. And kind of that's how we've come to work so well with exposure analytics, because they keep putting stuff out and it keeps being again and again useful in a variety of different use cases. We don't pretend to always be on the cutting edge, but we like to know where the cutting edge is. A large part of my role is in humanizing this technology, being able to understand it and break it down into seeing where it will fit within the events that we do, and then trying to inform that to the rest of the team. Because ultimately it's the design team, it's the project managers that are going to be selling this into our clients. So if they don't understand it, we don't have any hope. We can't possibly sell the benefits of it unless it resonates with them. I've been in events and technology since about 2011, but my background is actually psychology. My degree's in psychology, which has proved to be really unexpectedly useful in analysing the data that we get from exposure, because nobody escapes a psychology course without learning just a little bit about statistics, how to handle data, and things like biases, which I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to give you a little bit of a statistics session. I know you've trapped in, you've come in, you've had your coffees, your teas, they've closed the doors, they've locked them, you can't escape now, okay? Stats, just like 5 minutes, all right? I know it's dry. So biases are things like, is the data really showing what we're saying it's showing, or is it showing what we really want it to show? There's a difference, and you need to be honest with yourselves and in what you're putting across. Because any nudge towards explaining it as overly favourable, shall we say, we're all slightly guilty of this, but any nudge in that direction is a dishonesty, and you're doing your clients a disservice. A big one, construct validity. This one's going to come up a little bit later. That is a fancy way of saying, is the method that we use to measure an appropriate way of measuring what we wanted to measure? Okay. And then correlation, I've got a great example of this one, which is either going to go down like a lead balloon or you'll love it. Ice cream and death by drowning. If you are to plot the volume of ice cream sales and the number of deaths by, well, just says drowning incident, I'm putting death on it because I'm morbid. If you were to plot those on a graph, this happens year on year. It works for every single country, but you get this link emerges between volume of ice cream sales and drowning. So why is that, right? Is that because people are drowning in ice cream? Does ice cream help with grief? Or was that adage of, my nanny used to say, you can't eat an hour before swimming or you die? Which one's right? Of course, none of them, it's all crap. It's because the summer exists. In London, we get about 2 weeks of summer spread out across the year, so I don't know how that would affect the graph. But summer is the missing link in that bit of data. One of those doesn't cause another. There's a third factor. Have we got correlation? Cool. Okay, so we've done ice cream. We're going to go on to big data and small data. We'll touch briefly on the Chernobyl nuclear incident. And then we're going to talk about your data story. This will all make sense. Promise. Okay. Do you remember around about 2016, big data was in every single business headline. It was going to transform the world from everything from automotive to like washing up liquid. But the promises of that have not really come to fruition. And my opinion is that that's because you can't really make decisions on big data. Big data works really well if you already have a hypothesis. But it's small data that you can make impactful changes with. I'll tell you what I mean. So with big data, the promise is that if you feed it enough data points, it will push out a load of correlations, a load of links, which you can then work with. But as we've hopefully just figured out with the ice cream and drowning incidents, two things correlating aren't enough. It needs often third factors. It needs context. Small data, on the other hand, needs to be small enough for human comprehension and in a format that's intuitive. So things like weight, things like quantity, numbers. We have an inherent understanding of what it means when the numbers go up and what it means when they go down. And this is an example, if you were to imagine these are two hypothetical data sets, right? So if you say, are you having fun? From this view, you could maybe run some metrics on the positions of people, whether the sun's shining and whether people enjoy that. But if you really take the small data and zoom into a small enough data set, it becomes pretty clear, right? And this effectively is what exposure analytics do. They take huge data sets, 5.2 billion was that, lines of code, and they crunch those numbers down into small data that we can really work with. But the raw numbers are only half the story. We have the advantage of being at the events ourselves. So we get to use our observations, our history of events, and our intuition to take that data and wrap it in context and tell much more full stories. Every event that we do, where we run analytics on it, we produce a report, and this is some pages from that report, where we try and give them the key metrics, but then we include these behind the numbers sections and analyst notes. Analyst notes is really important because it's the one I do. And we don't just talk about the numbers themselves, but if you got good traffic, how much of that was down to you? Were you benefiting from your direct competitor who had a stand 3 plots over, but theirs was massive, and you were just benefiting from all the footfall that they got? Because if you're relying on the event year on year to bring a sea of people onto your stand, where are you going to be when the tide goes out? You need to know that what you're doing is having a real world impact. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about later, but if there's one thing 2020 is teaching us, is that we can't rely on even the biggest events to keep bringing us our footfall. We talk a lot about our recommendations. Actually, this analyst notes one's quite an interesting one. That graph is from a real graph. It's from a real report, where we had some information from one of the stand staff that the demo area wasn't really being used properly as a demo area. And if any of you have had exhibitions, you'll know that exhibition space is really, really expensive. You guys were really flashing the cash at the Confex for the size of your stand this year. That was amazing. But is all of it really being used to its full potential? Is your demo area being used as a place to attract? Or is it being used as a really, really expensive place to put your coffee cups? And we look into that data and we're honest and we give that feedback. Even if it's not something, if it's an uncomfortable truth, we try and take that integrity to say, you can do something better. Real insight comes from that combination of data and context. So context is also tied up in the tools that you use. So using, just by show of hands, who saw the HBO and Sky show Chernobyl? Round about half? Okay, cool. To recap what is an excellent miniseries. In the middle of the night, the Chernobyl nuclear power station are running some safety tests, and the reactor explodes. This guy, Anatoly Stevanovich Dyatlov, is the chief engineer, and Akimov is one of his physicists, his scientists. And Dyatlov says, why is my reactor on fire? Which is a hell of a question. And what's the radiation reading? And Akimov says, I don't know. I don't know why it's on fire. It wasn't intended. but the reading is 3.6 Röntgen per hour. Röntgen per hour is just a measure of radiation output. And he's saying, but he adds that it says 3.6, but that's as high as the measure goes. And he says, 3.6, you say, oh, well, it's not great, but it's not terrible. And in that moment, that frames the entire incident, because 3.6 is the number that gets escalated. That's the number that's measured, and that's the one that gets reported up and up and up to senior officials. Without the caveat, without the context, that that's as high as the measurement goes. So by removing either the context or by using an inappropriate tool, you end up with a completely different frame, a completely different, much smaller picture than it needed, than it deserved. I couldn't talk to you, does anyone remember what the actual measure was? I said 3.6, it's very small. Do you know what the real number is? Anybody? 15,000, it was 15,000 Röntgen per hour. And I couldn't talk to you about context today without running the maths on that. 15,000 is exactly 4,166 times greater. And to put that into a perspective, if you were to ask for a glass of water, that is the equivalent of somebody turning up with a 2007 Mercedes-Benz dual-purpose fire engine and emptying the entire tank into your face, followed by a 10-litre bucket of water. I couldn't get the maths exact. It's 9.4 if anybody is double-checking me. My point is that context is crucial. One bit of information can swing the entire thing. You can't tell the right story if you're using the wrong tools. Okay, how do you do it better? So, my recommendation is that you appoint a data storyteller, somebody within your organization who works across multiple events, multiple teams, that can take ownership of the data side of your business. Someone that can recognize that data is a journey. It's not a single point of feedback. It's something that you can take, measure, switch up, measure again. But it needs to be somebody who can take charge and really rally the troops and figure out what it is that you actually want to know. Are you interested in the profitability of leads? Is it interesting maybe to know whether the first 2 days of an event produce better quality leads than days 3 and 4? And it should be noted that this may extend beyond sensors alone. You might want to bring in some other things. But it's about having that conversation. By knowing more and more about the events that you are at and the performance of those, you can take active choices in putting the right people on the stands, following up properly, learning about the marketing that you go into pre-event. How many of the people that you booked up in different marketing activities actually turned up onto your stand? And there's all ways of figuring this out, but you need to take ownership of it. And lastly, there's no such thing as bad numbers. There's disappointing numbers. There's definitely disappointing numbers. But the numbers will either they'll teach you one or two things. They'll teach you either that the method that you used was perhaps not the best for capturing it. That's that construct validity I talked about at the start. Or it teaches you that you need to change something. You need to make it more attracting, change your marketing activity, just do something different. So it's actually becoming quite common now, thankfully, to talk about data and think about data as a story. But it occurred to me when I was writing this that having sensors at each event turns the story from a series of one-off novellas and into more of a choose-your-own adventure. I've got the books, for those of you that know the choose-your-own adventure books, or for anyone that's a little bit younger than that, just think Bandersnatch from Netflix. And that we all make a set of decisions before the event, a set of choices. We put it out there. With analytics, you then get the feedback on how that performs and use that to inform your next choice at the next event. It's all about thinking of it in a way of continuation rather than one-offs. And believe me when I say that when you have data, even inaction is a choice. If you have the information and you choose to do the same thing again, that is you making an active choice. Just not to get too philosophical on that. My takeaways then. Real data, real insight comes from fusing data and context together. Using the right tool for the job is absolutely crucial. And never see data as a judgment. This can be really, really difficult if your neck is on the line, if you've been running the project. Because it feels like there's this invisible force watching you, judging you silently from the back seats. In a very similar way to Ofsted, actually. I said to a couple of friends of mine who are teachers, what do you think of when you think of Ofsted? And one said, sharks! And the other one said, like creeps. They just sit at the back and you don't know what they're saying. And data can feel very similar because it's something that project managers are often not the ones putting it in. And when you don't have a direct control over it, that feels like a vulnerability. So instead, it's so important to embrace your data, embrace the measures, and use them in combination with your design team and your project management team. So, my closing question is, are you going to use data to tell your story? Accept, refuse. Thank you.